Well, it's about that time. Another week, another opportunity for the Jim Jackson Show here in Vegas. In Vegas, covering the Crown Tournament put on by Fox. And as always, you can join me at Jim Jackson Show on IG, but also at YouTube, richeisen.com. Listen, or wherever you download your local or all your podcasts, you can download the Jim Jackson Show there too as well. But like I said, I'm in Vegas. I was just in Newark last week for NCAA tournament, Sweet 16, Elite Eight. Got to see who I think the best team in the country is, which is Duke. And Florida's not too far behind. But here for the Crown Tournament put on by Fox. It's the first year. People are saying, what's the Crown Tournament? Well, it's an opportunity for teams in the Power Four, Power Five conferences who did not make the NCAA tournament to be able to play for $300,000 or ancillary prizes money-wise in one place in Vegas, one stop, make some money, have some fun, play some more basketball. So here doing this, but in the midst of this NCAA tournament, winding down the NBA season, speaking of which, getting close to the playoffs, a lot of questions, of course. Can OKC finally win it and break through and win it? Are the Lakers a legitimate threat? Right now, third in the West. Can Minnesota make a run? In the Eastern Conference, who's there to beat Boston? Is it really the time for the Cavs to step up after making some moves? Can the Knicks be a viable threat? I mean, so many questions. But I still think OKC and Boston are the top two-tier teams. But if the Lakers play OKC in a 7-game series in the Western Conference Finals, man, it's hard to bet against LeBron or Luka. Of course, my Clippers are sitting in 7th. I love the matchup, a 2-7 with Houston Rockets, of us advancing. If it stays that way, hopefully we can get to 6 and avoid the play-in. Kawhi is looking like Kawhi right now. Shout out to Kawhi, too, and his team for, despite all the noise, for taking the time to rehab right, to get back, to help kind of push the Clippers forward right now, healthy. And I think this would be the year where Kawhi is able to sustain that level of play and make it through the playoffs, however far we get. Hopefully it's all the way to the Western Conference Finals and to the championship, of course. But a lot of stuff going on. Happy to be a part of it. I got a great guest coming on who I've been trying to get for quite some time. Former sports writer for the New York Knicks back in 96 to 2018. Also now doing studio analyst work with the Brooklyn Nets of the Yes Network. It's my guy, Frank Isola. He's been through it. He's seen it. A New Yorker. He loves the NBA, loves college, but it's going to be a great conversation. Been looking forward to getting him on the show for a while. So join me with that. It's going to be exciting. There'll be a lot of fun, a lot of information, and I'm going to discuss with him why he's so cheap and don't want to tip. Finally, I can get Mr. Frank Isola on the show, who has more jobs than I do. So I finally get him on. Of course, former sports writer, too, with the Knicks from 96 to 2018. Currently on ESPN, also has I love the starting lineup show with you and Scal. I mean, the best. You guys have so much fun in the morning, so I tune in and listen to that. Let's see, what else? You work in Europe, you work in South America.
I do the net games. I do the net games on Yes. Hopefully
Yeah.
they'll get a high draft pick. So we do. Well, since we're going down that road, I've always been an admirer of yours ever since you were playing at Ohio State. And I still remember writing when it was clear that the dream team was going to add a college player. I
Yep.
wrote a story that you should be the guy because you were a versatile player. I said you'd fit in perfectly. I loved your game. And, I covered Jeff Van Gundy when he was in New York, when Jeff first got the job. So when you played for Jeff in Houston, I was always a big fan. I don't even know if we had met. It's like it's weird. We crossed paths,
We
but
crossed paths, but never just met.
yeah. But I remember telling Jeff, I was like, "What's Jimmy Jackson like? What's he like?" And I guess you and he hit it off famously. That's what I had heard. People said, "Oh, Jeff lets Jimmy do whatever he wants. He loves that guy."
That's how like Thibodeau right there that said that. Hey, no, but Jeff, the thing about Jeff was just by playing for Pat Riley, I got a sense of the mindset. Jeff had that mindset, but wasn't as dictatorial as Pat.
Yeah,
He demanded a lot, but his conversation is more of a people person, a little bit more lenient in some ways, but was very specific on how he wanted you to prepare. I mean, I had to sit there and watch him drink all them Diet Cokes all day long, just
yeah,
like he
yeah,
still
yeah.
does. So, hey, Frank, he switched. He said this is how he cut back. He went from the 16 ounce to the 12 ounce, saying that he cut back.
So Jeff is the assistant coach under Don Nelson. That's my first year on the
Oh,
beat. And you have Patrick's on the team and Charles Oakley, you got Derek Harper, you got
yeah, the
like
guys.
legitimate NBA players that are
Uh-huh.
like the real deal, playing through injury. So Don Nelson gets let go in Philadelphia. And this is before the internet. And we know that we hear that Jeff's going to become coach. So me and two other reporters, we actually went to the Ritz-Carlton in Philadelphia,
Mm-hmm.
and like we found out what room he was, and we knocked on his door. He let us in, and we interviewed him there.
Uh-huh.
And I love busting Jeff's chops because that night the Knicks played the worst team in the league, Philadelphia. I believe that was like the Dana Barros team, and they lose to Philadelphia. The next day, Jeff runs a 3-hour practice.
Uh-huh.
And and then Sunday, it's selection Sunday for the NCAA, which always happened about like 6 o'clock. And the Knicks were playing the 72 in Chicago Bulls. So Jeff had a shoot around at Madison Square Garden for a 5:30 game after having a 3-hour practice on
What?
Saturday. I
Mm-hmm.
go to the shoot around at the Garden, and Derek Harper's he's exhausted. And he says, Frank, he says, I don't know if you gamble. He goes, but I'm telling you, we're going to win the game tonight. And sure enough, they end up beating the 72 win Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls. And Derek, like in the fourth quarter, went on this run. Phil Jackson finally calls a timeout. And there's the days we sat, courtside, and I'm sitting courtside. And Derek Harper just kind of leans over. He looks up at me and he goes, "I told you, Frank." I was like, this is cool. This is like that's the NBA for
That,
me.
that's
I,
but
that
you
that
but back then it was so when I got to Dallas, Derek was still there.
Yeah.
So do you remember a guy named Stu Inman?
Yes.
So my second year, they hired Quinn Buckner.
Yep.
Quinn is a good friend of mine, but we had our
Oh,
run-ins
I
in
know.
Dallas. Okay. But Stu, they and so Fat Lever was on our team at the time, but Fat, still could play, but he had the knee injuries. He wasn't the old Fat Lever from Denver. Okay. They brought us in one day. This I knew it was going to hell in Dallas. And that year we only won 13 games. This was
Yep.
Jamal Bradford's second year. They said, Stu Inman said, Derek Harper is not a point guard. Okay.
Yep.
And that they wanted Fat to start. And that's how Derek got traded to the Knicks.
Yep.
Okay. This is what I was dealing with. But the Harp was like my old head when I first got in. So he kind of showed me, all the things necessary, not just to be a really good basketball player, but to be a pro, to be a
Yep.
real pro. But I'd never forget that conversation when they said, Derek Harper is really not a point guard, he's a two guard. But we're going to start a two guard who's playing point, which is Lafayette Lever, who was just older. I mean, those days in Dallas, Frank, were, I mean, three, I had three owners, four coaches in 5 years. I
Yeah.
mean, bananas, bro.
And
Bananas.
and Derek, I like all those Chicago guys because Derek is kind of that Isaiah Thomas, Doc Rivers generation, Eddie Johnson, who's got also has a show on
Yeah.
Sirius. And for all of them, I always thought it was interesting with the whole Jordan thing because those guys all have a lot of pride that come from Chicago, as
Yep.
being a Midwest guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I would always bust Eddie Johnson and say, "Hey, let's face it, man. When you say Chicago basketball, everybody automatically thinks of the guy that was born in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
Michael Jordan." And I got to cover Isaiah in New York. And when you talk about guys that are proud, Isaiah Thomas is like at the top of the list. So I
Right.
think that always drove them a little crazy. So I used to tweak Derek with that. But how about this though? Tell me this is, and Jeff.
Okay.
So the Knicks win that game. They fly to Dallas the next day. It's a Monday. They think they're going to play the Mavs on Tuesday.
Uh-huh.
Jeff has practice on a Monday. With the practice wraps up, and then Jeff says, he goes, "Let me ask you guys a question." That had really never happened before with Don Nelson. Don was like, he did his press conference when we were waiting to talk to players after practice. Don
Uh-huh.
Nelson was leaving. There was no film or anything going on.
Right.
So the day before, though, Phil Jackson, because now Jeff's in his second day as a job, everyone's convinced the Knicks are going to go after a big name coach,
Mm-hmm.
Rick Pitino, Larry Brown, Phil Jackson. So
Right.
Phil did his classic, maybe it's a job I could be interested. It's the Knicks. He does the whole thing.
Right.
So Jeff says, "Let me ask you guys a question." Because what did you think of Phil Jackson campaigning for a job while he still has a job and while somebody else holds a job? So we're given like I get, I don't know. Jeff says, "I thought it was bull, you know what?" And then
Yeah.
Jeff starts ranting, and we're like, "Can we write this?" He's like, "Yeah, you can write it." And we're like,
That's Jeff, man.
and we're like, things are about to be different. And
Yep.
resonated. That's what resonated with the public with Jeff. He was like the working man, and I'm going to fight, and I'm going to go after the establishment, which is big bad Phil Jackson and the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. That's what the fans in New York liked. And as media people, we absolutely loved it.
Yeah, no, Jeff is the best. It is funny, full circle, being able to pick his brain and talk to him now that he's with, of course, I cover the Clippers and he's with the Clippers, and where he's at in his life because,
Yeah.
he had many opportunities for coaching before and, while he was doing TV at ESPN. But like he indicated, he said his daughter was still in high school at the time and that he had spent so much time away coaching that he did not want to go back into it if he chose to until she had moved on and was out. So the timing was perfect for me to kind of re-engage with Jeff. I know this is something that Ty had wanted for a few years now that he's been coaching, to have Jeff a part of it. And I tell you what, it's interesting that the guys that are on the team, they know Jeff from TV, not the coaching side, but the respect that he gets when he talks and he lays out a game plan, is incredible.
Yeah.
Because he's so precise into his game planning. He's really specific in defensive rotations on expectation, but he has this little sense of humor too that guys can resonate with. So when he's killing you, he's laughing at you. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? He's telling a joke. And it's been great to kind of see that whole thing
Yeah.
work for Jeff and for Ty Lue.
Yeah, Jeff's the guy that he always got on all the time was John Starks because John would be combative
Yep.
and John could also take it. So all the players were constantly busting John's chops. Patrick would call him Pinky because when John got mad, his face would kind of turn pink. So that was Patrick's nickname for him. And the job that Jeff has done with the Clippers, and Ty Lue's a great coach, and it says a lot about him that he bring a guy in like Jeff,
Yep.
knowing that Jeff is going to be loyal to Ty Lue. And I've spoken to Jeff too. He loves, Ty and he loves Steve Ballmer and everything that they've
Mm-hmm.
done there. So I guess it's March 28th when the Clippers were in Brooklyn, which was,
Right.
last Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see the impact that they have. And I'll tell you another thing. Kawhi Leonard, because you would have been, I guess, you were doing NCAA tournament stuff, but at that game that night, Kawhi Leonard in the first half might have put on one of the best performances for a
Mm-hmm.
half that I've seen
Mm-hmm.
in person in a long, long time. He had 25 points and he absolutely dominated the game at the defensive end. I'm texting Brian, who's in San Antonio, Brian Scalabrine. I said, Kawhi Leonard is an absolute stud. He said, you can make the case when you're watching him play that he's the best player in the NBA. And in that moment, he looked like the best player in the NBA. Offense, defense, he was absolutely unstoppable.
But it goes back to this is that I guess the catch-22 here is that I think what happened to Kawhi by being misdiagnosed in San Antonio plays a lot into why when it comes to rehab and timing and coming back, a lot of that is on his time and his doctors, not the team. And in this case, being able to take the time to get healthy, because when he came back, Frank, he actually looked lighter, was in
Yeah.
shape. Not game shape, but you can look at his body because the year before when he came back in training camp, he looked heavier, but not out of shape, but he just looked heavier. This year when he came back, you can tell his body was ready for the action. And the way they staggered the minutes in the games and led up to him now playing 35, 36, 37 minutes, the process has worked. And this is a different Clippers team with him in the lineup. um, than what it was before, of course. And it's going to be interesting. I got the last 4 games down the stretch and where we land, whether we can get to that 6th position
Yeah.
and avoid the play-in game or have to kind of go through the gauntlet of, the 7-8 game, 7 and the 9-10 game, and then end up playing a number 1 seed, which would be tough. But watching Kawhi now, man, it's his movements, his explosiveness, and you said it, defensively.
Oh, incredible.
It's incredible. And speaking about players, where do you land on this, Frank? And I know you and Scal talk about this a lot on the show. With the game that Jokic put up, SGA. Before it was like, well, SGA, but Jokic has been putting up these numbers. And that right there, 61, that 61 triple-double. Where does that land with you in the MVP race?
I get a vote, and I always, I wait until all the games. So one thing about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, what are they, 14 games better than
Yeah.
anybody else? Like and listen, he's got one guy on his team that's been an all-star, and that was this year, Jalen Williams. I think the greatest thing you could say about Nikola Jokic is that his starting lineup does not feature a player that's ever made
Ever. Yeah.
the all-star team. And that game the other night, and we joked around about it. I said, Brian, watch. People are going to somebody will say, yeah, but he didn't win the game. Sure, he didn't win the game. They had the ball up 1 under 10 seconds to go.
Yeah.
Russ misses the layup, then the
Yep.
foul was committed, and he's missing 2 starting players. I think the guy is the best player in the world. But for me, it's too compelling the wins have to mean something. And
Yeah.
I get it. People are going to say, well, how come you didn't vote Jason Tatum first last year? That's a fair point to make. But you look, to me, he's got a great supporting cast. And I gave Tatum a top 5 vote last year. I forget exactly where he was. Last year, I voted Jokic first, Shai second. It's hard not to pick Shai. He plays all the time. They win all the time. And Jimmy, think about this. Now, they could end up losing any time now. But if they win their final 6 games, they'll finish the year on a 17-game winning streak. I'm not saying that's going to happen. But if they do win the next 6 games, they're going to have 70 wins. And you could say, oh, the NBA is different now. Go look at all those teams in the West. Start rattling off 1 through 10. There's a lot of good teams.
Well, and it's not SGA's fault because we thought Minnesota was going to be there, a really contender, Memphis being back. So, and Denver started off slow.
Yep.
So it's not OKC's fault because of all the other things that have transpired in the West. Nobody saw Houston coming and being second. Nobody saw that at the beginning of the year.
Right.
So they had to play what was in front of them. They dominated. And it's interesting that you say that too, is that how dominant he has been. Why do you think like last year with the way how dominant Boston was, that yet still Jason Tatum doesn't kind of get that same kind of respect that other superstars in that situation would get for dominating the season from day one all the way through?
Yeah. Well, I think, too, for Jason Tatum, so I think a couple of things hurt him, which is you could say fair or unfair. He plays for a great team, so a lot of people are going to look at it that way. I think he needs to make himself a little bit more available to the media.
You mean media-wise or whatever?
Yeah, I think like he needs to be, you got to present yourself and make yourself more likable. Yeah, you have to understand you play for the Celtics. So unless you live in the New England area, most people hate the Celtics because they have all those banners. There's an arrogance about them. So I think, and Jokic doesn't do that. I'm not saying
that's
that
what I was going to say, Frank. Pushback is Jokic doesn't do it.
He doesn't, but he also doesn't play for the Celtics. So there is kind of this underdog thing. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's Canadian, but he does, he's available all the time, and there's something about him where I think he presents himself a little bit better. I think Tatum's brilliant. And again, I've given him MVP votes, I think at least the last 2 years. It might have been the last 3 years. But what I respect about Tatum, and it's the same thing about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, go to basketballreference.com, look at the games played in the regular season, look how many total games the guy's played in the playoffs. The guy always plays. And to me, that says something. And what I love about what Boston did last year, and the league office, they love this because everyone's going to say, oh, the regular season doesn't matter. Okay, but the team with the best record cruised through the playoffs last year. This year, if Oklahoma City wins, I don't think the league's going to be disappointed. I think the league is going to say, you see what happened? This team started out the season, they sprinted to the finish line, and then in the playoffs, they steamrolled the competition. But I think that's a fair point you make because not everyone does kind of make themselves available. And Jokic, that's a great way. Look at Luka. Luka could care less about the media, but I think it's just a little bit tougher for Tatum. Hey, listen, Tatum went to Duke. So there's a little bit of that,
Okay.
right? He's had a ton of success as a young guy. I like him. I give him votes, but for him to get into that next level, maybe it has something to do with we always identify him with Jaylen Brown as well. Do we really identify Jokic with anybody else? Do I identify Shea with anybody else in Oklahoma City? It's always kind of Tatum and Brown. Tatum and Brown is how everyone refers to the Celtics.
Yeah, and with Murray kind of falling off a little bit, I think before was that deadly combination between those two, kind of the reincarnation of Stockton Malone, in
Yeah,
Denver. But then
yeah,
with Jamal Murray kind of not ascending and taking a step back, it's all been on the shoulders of Jokic of carrying Denver. So his narrative is so much more different, like you said, than I mean, not just Jaylen Brown, but just the team in general of everybody in Boston, which makes it quote unquote a little bit easier for Jason Tatum
yeah,
to kind of do his thing,
yeah.
which is unfair,
Yeah,
from that
but
perspective.
Jimmy, look at it this way too. All right, so if you look at Boston, forget about where they are right now in their careers, but Al Horford was an all-star. Kristaps Porzingis has been an all-star. Drew Holiday has been
Yep.
an all-star. Derek White almost made the all-star team.
Mm-hmm.
Peyton Pritchard's probably going to win Sixth Man
Six
of the
men
Year
a
or
year.
finish in the top three. And then they have Jaylen Brown, who was a Finals MVP last year. So for Denver, again, except for Russell Westbrook, who really is what? There's the seventh guy on their team, sixth or
Mm-hmm.
seventh guy, former MVP, but not that same player. All these other guys, Jamal Murray probably would have been an all-star by now if the guy just could stay healthy. But I think that's also another thing. I think everyone looks at Boston as basically this powerhouse team that has the two great players at the top.
Yeah. Now, speaking of Boston too, is this the year? And Cleveland has been great, legitimate wise, and they are legitimate. But can they beat Boston in 7 games? That they split it during the year. That's one thing.
Yep.
But 7 game series is totally different. Can they get them in 7?
You know what? I still would give the Celtics the advantage because of the experience. But the biggest thing for me, for the Cleveland Cavaliers, you look at the last couple of years, Jared Allen hurt. Last year, Donovan Mitchell missed the last two games.
Mm-hmm.
So that, the Cavaliers, kind of like with Kawhi in LA, is he going to be healthy for the playoffs? That changes everything. And I love what the Cavaliers have done. JB Bickerstaff did a great job. I thought it was a little unfair what happened to him, considering the injuries
Mm-hmm.
that they had come
Yeah.
playoff time. But you tell me, I look at the Celtics. I still think when push comes to shove, you look at them play every time. Like last night, they lost to Miami. They come off a long road trip, they lose. But four guys didn't play every single night. They never have their whole team together.
Yeah.
It's almost like they've kind of load managed their way all through the regular season. They're so deep, so talented that they can kind of keep resting guys. But something interesting did happen against Miami after the game. Jaylen Brown mentioned that his knee has been bothering him. So I don't know. You know how
Mhm.
this works. I mean,
Yeah.
you got guys have to stay healthy, and Boston stayed relatively healthy all throughout the playoffs. So that who knows how serious it is, but that's something that should raise a red flag.
Yeah. I think the Cavs getting DeAndre Hunter from a
Yeah.
defensive perspective, 'cause I thought they were too small on the wings uh, to to really negate what Boston could do and give you. Does that one move really kind of level the playing field? I think it does a little bit. I think it's still going to be some matchup issues sometimes when Cleveland goes big against the Celtics, but it's going to be interesting in the East to see kind of how that grind is, because the grind, I say, because the Knicks are going to grind you out whoever they play.
Yep.
So does that where, depending on where the Knicks end up falling, a
Yep.
Cleveland down or a Boston down when they finally get to the Western Conference Finals? Because you cover the Knicks, you're there in New York, you covered them before, but at the end of the day, that's a series, whether it goes 5 games, 6 games, 7 games, that's going to grind into those legs going into the next round for whatever team they play. Now in the West, interesting. The Lakers are third right now.
Yeah.
They end up playing. If it stayed pat right now, it'd be Minnesota. Is OKC? I want to say this. Who can beat OKC? We believe in them, but yet we think. I
I
think a
know.
lot of consensus is they're not the overwhelming favorite to come out the West.
I know. Yet the fact that they're so good defensively
Yeah.
and they come at you in waves. When they came to Brooklyn, they had just lost at home. That was the game where they lost to Minnesota. Remember, they lost like a 16-point lead or whatever it was, a
Gave it up.
13-point lead, like the last like four. It was something crazy. So they came to Brooklyn and they must have thought, this team's nothing. And they were getting smoked. And they were down at one point. I think it was like 16 or 18 points. And then at the start of the fourth quarter, it was
Hmm.
Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on the bench. I believe they won on an 18-2 run. And it was a guy, Cason Wallace, and it
Yeah.
was Aaron Wiggins. I mean, when they want to turn it up defensively. So that
Isaiah Joe.
exactly.
Yep.
Another kind of no-name guy. So those guys, so the fact that if you could defend, that translates to the playoffs. What would concern me about them is let's remember they were knocked out in the second round last year. I get it. No Isaiah Hartenstein,
Hmm.
no Holmgren. They
No
needed
home. Right.
that size, but I don't know. You go into a playoff series and you got to go up against LeBron and
Luca.
Luca. That would concern me a little bit.
Yeah.
That's
And
going to
that's what I
because
was looking at the West. And I was like, it's not as clear cut and dry just because it now, just like Boston, they had to kind of go through the gauntlet, get to the Eastern Conference Finals, lose it, and then boom, they broke through.
yep,
OKC hasn't had that kind of adversity yet outside. I mean, again, losing last year, but you had circumstances. They haven't gotten to the Western Conference Finals with the expectations and then lost it and
yep.
kind of gone through. So it's going to be very interesting too to see once the playoff picture shakes out where the Lakers land, where Denver ultimately lands. So I think right now with Houston, I love Houston, but as far as being a number 2 seed, they're not a number 2 seed to me
Yeah.
with regards to really threatening to get to a Western Conference because they might have an issue. Shoot, it depends on who at 7. In that first round.
They could get the Clippers. They could get the Warriors.
If
They
I
could get
like our
Minnesota.
matchup, if we get stay at 7 and go against Houston, I love our matchup
I
against.
do, I do, I do too. And let's remember the Golden State Warriors. And I keep thinking
Oh
about if you're
yeah,
Kevin Durant, who right now is nursing a sore ankle, you
uh-huh.
think about what's happened in February. The guys that are your peers, you have LeBron James is in LA. They go out and get Luca. Steph Curry is in Golden State. They go out and get Jimmy Butler. And you look at what's happened with both teams. Think about the way you view both of those teams now and opposed to before they made those trades. And then you look at Phoenix, which needed a trade they wanted to make when they would have made one
Mm-hmm.
if Bradley Beal didn't have that no trade clause. And here's Kevin Durant on the outside looking in.
Looking
And if
in,
he doesn't
yep.
come back soon, they're probably not going to make it. If you're him, how are you not sick to your stomach that LeBron at 40 has a chance to win a championship if things
Mm-hmm.
break right or get to a finals? Same thing with Steph Curry at 37. And here's Kevin Durant thinking, man, I didn't even finish in the top 10.
I know. And see, Matt Ishby is a good friend of mine, the Michigan State, and running a business and running a franchise, buying talent is not the same. And
Yep.
I think Matt is learning that. It's going to be interesting to see. James Jones is a good friend of mine, kind of where this thing lands this summer because they're cap locked, don't have any draft picks. The only movable parts are Booker and Durant. You're not
Yep.
moving Booker.
Nope. I'm not
Um,
doing that.
and it's and like you said, for KD from that perspective, this summer is going to be interesting to see what happens with that Phoenix
What
deal.
can you get? What can you get from you think?
See, that's the problem because he's so as great as Kevin Durant is, later stage, you're not giving up young talent, a high draft pick or locked in right now for Kevin Durant that may have another 2 years at this level. The KD is special, but a KD that's 35, 36 is a lot different than a KD at 29, 30,
Yep.
31. And I
All right.
think that's the issue you're going to run into with getting something of really great value back.
Yeah. Let me give you a scenario. Okay.
Okay.
The Knicks, let's say, argument's sake, the Knicks, rough and tough first round series and they win, or even they lose, but then they get to the second round, they lose to Boston. If you could get a deal where you're trading Mikal Bridges back to Phoenix,
Yeah, you do
obviously
it.
something else.
You do it.
Because, and I
You,
agree, you haven't won a championship since 73 if you're the
yeah,
Knicks.
you do it. Because Mikal Bridges was a stop. I mean, it fit. They like him. They like him. But in order to win it now for this window to really compete, to get KD for 2 years, that deal I could see being done.
Let me give you another one.
Okay.
The how about the Houston Rockets under your scenario? Let's say they play the Clippers or somebody who finishes seventh and they lose in the first round. They have some assets.
I
You
wouldn't
think
do it. I
you
wouldn't
wouldn't do
do
it
it.
if you're Houston?
Nope. Nope. I wouldn't mortgage my future because if you get KD now, you're not winning next year.
All right.
From my scenario, I think the young talent that they have is still maturing. And with Ime there, they're going to mature. Now, you get a Kevin Durant, you give up 2 to 3 of those pieces. Yes, you're going to be incrementally better, but you're still not winning the championship. It doesn't get you the championship. Now, nothing is guaranteed, as you know. Anything can happen. But okay, are you going to be better than OKC? Are you going to be better than the revamped Lakers squad that's going through training camp?
And you don't know how, and to your point, you don't know how long you'll have them at a high level, especially with all the injuries. That's why I always say one of the greatest trades in the history of the NBA, certainly the last 20, 30 years, is, Masai Ujiri rolling the dice and getting Kawhi. Yeah, they only had him for 1 year, but how many teams make trades thinking this could be the trade that puts us over the top? Hey, Phoenix started with Bradley Beal. Look where they are.
Yeah.
They make a trade. They go get Kawhi Leonard, and they win the champion. A lot of things fell into place. He had the great shot against Philly to knock them out. Then Kevin Durant is hurt to start the finals. He blows out at Achilles. The next game, Klay Thompson blows at his knee. Hey, it happens. But guess what? They made a great trade to get Kawhi. They raised the banner. Kawhi's the finals MVP, and a month later, he's off to LA. But it was worth it. I think it's worth it.
No, it is. But you got to look at those components, too, because with a Fred VanVleet, with a DeMar DeRozan, with Kyle Lowry, you had grizzled veterans that had been there that lost. So their roster construction was a lot different.
Like the Knicks.
No. Like that's why I said that deal with Mikal makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
To get it, especially the way, we don't know what's going to happen with Boston another year.
Yeah.
We figure they'll be back. But again, we're forecasting past this. But I would do it if I was the Knicks. Listen, interesting. You didn't hit me too when you came and saw Cooper Flagg too. I told you.
Well, you know what?
What?
I wasn't sitting. I saw you, and you were in your seat. So for people who don't know, Jimmy and I texted the night before. I was trying to get him to come to where I live. This way I could look like a big shot hanging around with this guy. How old? You look like you're 35 years old, for crying out loud, you son of a gun.
Hey, look, you know why?
You drink water. Ah, that's what it is.
It keeps the stress levels down. The cigars.
Do you drink like brandy with it, or like
no?
Whiskey?
So I got away from like the bourbons and scotches. I have some red wine, some tequila, but it's too much sugar in the bourbon and scotches. So I got away from that.
That's how you keep yourself so fit. All right. So you were in your seat early before the game, and I'll tell you what, I went to a couple of college basketball games this year. I went to see St. John's UConn at the Garden.
Yeah.
Did you do that game?
Yeah, I did that game.
All right. It was the same kind of game. In the second half, it was between 7 and 13. Like I never thought UConn was coming back against St. John's in that game. No. And at no point did I think Alabama was going to come back. But now that you've seen the guy up close a few times this year, but you were there for the 30-point game, like what do you think about him? You think he's the real deal?
I do, man. I really do. And the reason why is because, of course, the high basketball IQ, the versatility, very unselfish. I mean, John Schreier has to really poke at him to be more selfish, which is a great quality. But it's his motor. I think that's what separates him from maybe an Ace Bailey. And that's not taking anything from Ace, because Ace plays hard. But this young man plays hard all the time. Unselfish. You don't have to motivate him to want to do it on the other end. Okay. And when he sees an opening, he makes the right play. And you think about it, he reclassified. He's supposed to still be in high school. And to be able to play at this level, at that level, with the efficiency in which he plays. Now, keep in mind, I love Con Knipple too, the young freshman for Duke. But he has the right pieces around him where he doesn't have to go out like an Ace Bailey and have to really dominate in order for them to win.
Yeah.
And his upside is, I compared him a lot to, size-wise, not as tall, but like Keith Van Horn, okay? And Keith was athletic, and people forget how good Keith was at Utah.
Yep.
But that with a little bit of Larry Bird, with a little bit of Jason Tatum.
Yeah.
That combination of those is what I see with Cooper Flagg. The athleticism, the intellect, but then he has some stuff in his game like Tatum, the pull-ups, the mid-range, the mid-post. He can make plays off the dribble. And just because I had him first when they played Illinois in the Garden. So I got a chance to see him.
That's when they blew him out, right?
Yeah,
that was a blowout.
I mean, they mollywopped him. Mollywopped him. And then got a chance to see him, Sweet 16, Elite 8, and watch how he's grown. I mean, it's just I love it. And I had to give my man Scal a shout out for that.
Yeah, we played that clip of you congratulating Brian for the job that he had done. I like the fact that he rebounds. He definitely makes an impact on both ends of the court. I give Duke a lot of credit because I said this to Brian. You watch them play; they got a lot of young players. I mean, they play like they've been together for like 2 or 3 years.
You know what it is, though, Frank? With Sion James, when they put him in the starting lineup, maybe late December, he's older.
Yeah.
That and Tyrese Proctor. Older. So they stabilized the backcourt, which is very important in college. They stabilized the backcourt with veteran leaders. So Knipple, Malawach, and also Cooper, who are younger, they don't have to worry about trying to make all the decisions.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important. And then when you go to the bench, Malik Brown comes off the bench. Bradley comes off they're young, but they're big.
Yeah.
Nobody comes off the bench. Nobody plays under 6'5", Frank.
I know.
Everybody's 6'5" and up. So that's why it's going to be interesting against Houston when Houston brings this pressure. And this is a different Houston team because in the past, like St. John's, they didn't shoot free throws well and they didn't shoot the three well. But this year is a different story.
Yeah.
Offensively, they're better. Couple that with their defense, it's going to be interesting to see how Duke handles that because even though they played Auburn, even though they played Kentucky, even though they played Kansas, they haven't played a defense like Houston.
Yeah. So I went and saw to the traditional Big Ten rivalry. It was Rutgers UCLA. So I got a chance to see Ace Bailey play in early January. I think you're right. Like the first half, maybe there was a little of just kind of sticking him in the corner. But in the second half, he got more aggressive on both ends of the court. And then you see the impact that he could make. Man. But he's also playing with Dylan Harper, who's got the ball in his hands. Right. I was impressed. That's one game. I was impressed with Dylan Harper. And Ace Bailey was good in the second half, but you could see the talent there.
Yeah, no, man. It's great, man. Hey, I want to say this because I love listening to the show with you and Brian. And there's some some quirks that you have on there, especially the one about you tipping and don't want to tip. you want
I tip.
Yeah, no. But you asked the question like, why am I required? What was it to tip the 20%
for like a cup of coffee?
Come
on, man! It takes 3 seconds to do that. Then you're under a lot of pressure. So we
under pressure.
So a bunch of so I got a group of people here. We go second year in a row. We did it. We go to London in December, right around the time of the NBA Cup when there's that stretch of those days where there's no NBA game.
Right.
So we fly over there, and we land. We take the red eye going over. We land. We get into our hotel. We go to a coffee shop there. I order the coffee, and they have the same little thing. And they spin it around, and nowhere on it does it say tip. I was like, I need to move to Europe. I got to move here. Hey, I delivered paper. So I worked for the New York Daily News. When I was a kid, I used to deliver the paper. And you want to get tips. It's amazing how many people if they owe you $3 for the week or whatever it was, and they're giving you $3. And I'm like, come on, man. I've always wanted a job where I can get tipped. I'm telling you, my next life, I'm going to come back looking like you. But my first job as a kid, I'm going to be a waiter until I'm about like 20. Because I think if I were a waiter, I'd kill it because I could kind of BS people a little bit and I would hustle. I'm kind of jealous of people that could do that. My issue is when I say coffee, the guy turns, puts coffee and hands it to me. I'm getting the milk myself. I got to give the guy $1 for that? Come on, man. Come on.
But the wages they're getting is, I mean, I get what you said, but it's funny because you and Brian, the combination of the two is great radio because you give enough detail, you give enough insight, but it's fun and it's entertaining. And it's not, I'm going to beat you up. You got to have this point. You got to have this point. Yeah. It's like, I listened to you today, and what was the reporter you had on there? And he said that he would take Chris Paul instead of Magic Johnson.
Come on, man. And I like Chris Paul. Come on, man. Come on. As I was, I think, and it's probably an age thing. Like Magic Johnson, I mean, come on, Jimmy, you do college and pro.
Yeah.
The dude won the 79 national championship game. I think it was in late March. It might have been
Yeah,
like
late
March
March.
30th, March 31st.
Hmm.
And by the following May, which I'm bad at math, what is that, 14, 15 months later, he's winning an NBA championship and he's the MVP of the finals. I mean, we went, and I love Zion in college, but we were ready to build a statue of Zion. He got eliminated in the Elite Eight.
Yeah.
Magic's winning a national championship, playing the next season, and he's an absolute star. You can't. Chris Paul is a great player, no question about it. But you tell me, you play in the NBA. Where's Magic Johnson?
No, no. And you know what I always say about this. This is where the unfair comparisons come in to me. You can't transpose back or forward somebody's game because training was different,
Yep.
mindset was different, and how you played the game. It's like you can't take Steph Curry. People say, well, Steph Curry couldn't play back in the late 80s, 90s. I say, why? I said, D. Brown did. Dana
Yeah.
Barrows did. Spud Webb did. Muggsy
Yeah.
Bogues did. I said, the difference is they grew up playing in the playground, in the park, in the gyms, physical. So that's how they played. Michael Adams, they played like that. So you can't take Steph that's shooting all his threes and say you're going to take that game and put it back in the late 80s because
Yeah.
he wouldn't grow up playing that way.
You're right.
It's just like you couldn't take, they said, well, if Shaq played in today's game, he would dominate. I said, no. To me, Shaq would be more like an Embiid because an Embiid being pick and pop on the
Yeah.
perimeter. He can post up every now and then, but from the time he was 12, 13 years old, he would be taught to play on the perimeter. So you can't take Shaq from there and put him in today's game and say he would be on the post getting the ball 20 times a game
Yeah.
because he didn't grow up playing like that.
Here's the amazing thing too about the NBA with the 3-point shot. So Derek White broke the record the other day for the most
Mm-hmm.
3-pointers in a season for made. Larry Bird's, he has, so Derek White this season has more 3-pointers made in a season than Larry Bird had ever attempted in a season. And I
Right.
remember like years ago, whether it was Dale Ellis or Ricky Pierce, even Steve Kerr to a certain degree, Craig Hodges on the Bulls, they were like 3-point specialists. It was almost like you were left-handed reliever coming out of the bullpen. You were kind of used in certain situations, and it was like a specialty, basically.
It
You were
was.
almost like a niche player. Now it's like it's amazing how many like threes in when you look at Steph and Dame Lillard, like we weren't watching that years ago. I
No.
remember doing the Knicks Miami Heat playoff games, and Tim Hardaway was shooting like a couple of feet back, and even back then it like blew my mind. It's like, look where he's shooting from. That's like a layup for Steph now, where he was shooting from.
But listen, but Larry Bird only attempted 2.5 to 3-point
I know.
shots a game.
Yeah.
So the numbers, of course, are going to be passed as far as sometimes the shooting percentage and the number of attempts and number of makes because you're shooting now 8 to 9 a game, whereas back then, if you shot 2 to 3 3-pointers, that was a lot. So
Yep.
the numbers don't really compare when you're talking about who's the greatest shooter when you start putting the number of makes because the attempts are more.
Yep.
So it's hard to quantify the two of those. And that's where I think it gets lost in the shuffle when people look at comparison with a Larry Bird or Reggie Miller or Dale Ellis, like you talked about, even a Dale Curry who shot the lights out.
That's right.
But
It's
you,
another
but,
specialist.
but
Yep.
you but you're only shooting 2 to 3 a game.
And when the people bring up the physicality of the league, it's interesting because the other night you had the incident with the Detroit Pistons in Minnesota, right?
Right.
And I was watching some highlights of Bird when Lambeer threw him to the court. Scrum breaks out, like guys are throwing punches. Bird gets up, he throws the ball at Bill Lambeer. Then Rodman comes over to Larry Bird. All this stuff's going on. But back then, unless you watch Sports Center or you watch the local highlights, you were not going to see that. That
No.
was not on Twitter. So the Pistons fight happens with Minnesota, and the fans have cameras from like from their seats. So we're
Mhm.
seeing 19 different angles. Everyone's breaking it down like it's the Zapruder film with Kennedy being shot. Everyone's looking at it from a bunch of different angles. Everyone's like, "Oh my God, look what's happening!" Look at the fights back then didn't have the same reaction, Jimmy, because not everyone really saw them. It's not something that like was, you turn on your phone because you didn't have a phone and you could see the fight 100 times, and you have and if depending on where you're coming from, you can say, look at Isaiah Stewart. The guy's always involved in everything. Look at him here. Where you're saying Dante DiVincenzo jumped in. He never should have done that. Nobody was doing that really in the 70s and 80s when these like little skirmishes were breaking out. Because let's face it, what happened the other night happened in the 70s, 80s, and even 90s in the
Oh hell,
NBA.
oh
But
yeah,
we just didn't we made a big deal over, Steven Jackson and the Pacers going into the crowd in Detroit, and rightfully so. But we really never made a big deal of this stuff happening on the court. I was at a preseason game when I covered the Knicks. Charles Barkley, Charles Oakley got in a fight in a preseason game,
yeah.
and they're rolling around.
And
Like
they,
the next day, nobody was really talking about
hey,
it.
listen, how many people really, younger people really saw Dr. J when he grabbed Larry Bird by the throat in
That's
the garden?
right.
You know what I'm
That's
saying? Or Xavier McDaniel getting into it. So,
Yep.
and I played with Xavier. So it was then, and you really threw punches too. I mean, and
Wait,
got
wait,
a
wait,
one
where,
game
where, where,
suspension
where'd you play with
at the
X-Men?
Nets under Calipari.
Oh, because Charles played with him in New York, and I
Yeah.
think a couple of years earlier, they had. If you go on YouTube, you
When
could
he was
see
in
the fight
Seattle.
between Charles
When he was
Oakley
in
and
Seattle.
yeah,
When,
yeah,
when
yeah,
yeah, when Xavier's
yep,
in Seattle,
with those
he and
great
Charles got
uniforms.
into it at the Garden.
Hey, when we first started doing NBA radio, this might have been like '07, and we interviewed X-Man. He might have been in South Carolina because I know that's where he's from. And he was
South
in like a
Carolina.
diner with his family, and you just hear like plates and like he's kind of cursing a little bit. I loved Xavier McDaniel as a player because when he came to the Knicks only for that 1 year, he was with him and Oakley, and they're going after Scottie Pippen, and they're
Yep.
getting in Michael Jordan's face. The Knicks losing him to the Celtics was big. That really hurt the Knicks because they needed that kind of toughness, that extra toughness that he brought.
Listen, one time we were on the bus playing cards, and I was beating Xavier, and he accused me of cheating. He was mad. And we were in the back of the bus, and I said, "You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna have to take this L, but I can't let Xavier get me." And the whole bus it's quiet. And Calipari was sitting in the front. It really wasn't nothing he could do. I said, Xavier, what we gonna do, man? I mean, because I'm winning. You mad? You upset? I said, I'm gonna have to go ahead and just take this L then. Because, but we're great friends to this day. And what I loved about a lot of the old school guys was, I think you get a misconception like with Oakley, with Xavier McDaniel, guys that really got into it. I played with Terry Cummings,
Yeah,
nicest guys you
yeah,
want
he
to be
was. I
around.
covered him in New York for a
But you
year.
but you get on that other side,
Yeah, I know.
you get to that. They don't start stuff. They don't start stuff. But you get to that other side and you can't peel it back.
Yeah. I
That's
I covered I covered the Knicks 1 year. I think it might have been '98, and they had
uh
Buck Williams, Charles Oakley, and Terry Cummings. Which, like growing up and you're watching Terry Cummings at
huh.
DePaul, it was pretty cool. Now, hang on, when you were on the Nets, was Jason Williams on the team?
Yes,
All
but
right.
Jason got hurt. He had the
Oh,
wrist.
all right. So in October, the Nets had a game, a night game, and I got called. So I went to University of Maryland, and
I,
Maryland was playing Syracuse at noon at Barclays Center.
hold on,
So this
when you walked
person
on as a soccer player.
Exactly. Yeah, I was big time. They invited me. A buddy of mine invites me to the game. I don't really want to go, but there's going to be some like kind of big shots there. So I'm
Uh
like, because I know my day now, dude. As you know, listen, show all I do is complain. I'm playing
yeah.
soccer from 7 to 9 in the morning. I got to jump in the shower, get to Brooklyn. I'm going to be there from 12 to 2:30, and then the net game doesn't even start till 7:30. So this is like a more than a 12-hour day in Brooklyn. It was freezing cold. Anyway. I get to the game. The net Maryland kills Syracuse, but who's at the game that night? Jason Williams and Charles Oakley. And Jason looks great. Jason has completely changed his life.
Oh,
He's down
big
in
time.
Florida running a
Rehab,
drug and
drug.
alcohol
Yeah.
rehab center. He looked tremendous, and to be around those two guys was because I love Charles and I covered Jason. I covered the Nets before a few years before you got there. I was there when Derek was on the team
Yeah.
and
And
Kenny
Kenny
Anderson. We had
Anderson.
we had a blast with those guys.
So I saw Jason. Jason was there. Of course, all the former St. John's alumni. It was great. Walter Berry was there.
Oh, cool.
And I grew up. I told Walt, and Walt's a good friend of mine. I still got VHS tapes of the 86, 85, 86 Big East
Yeah.
uh, championship game, St. John's and Syracuse. St. John's. Yes, it was St. John's, Syracuse. And but Jason was there. So I got a chance to catch back up with him that weekend there at the Garden. He looked really good, man.
He did. He
I
looks.
was I
He,
was
all
so
right,
happy for Jason, man.
I am too. All right, let me ask you this: you're coming out of high school. Was Ohio? Who else was recruiting you
No,
besides Ohio?
so how about this? Kenny Anderson and I were number one, number two in the country at the time. We took our Syracuse visit together. So we were going to the same school. So it was Syracuse, North Carolina, Georgetown, Ohio State, Michigan. But it's funny because back then you had the rotary dial-up phone.
Yep.
Kenny calls me at home and says, "Yo, Jim, I made up my mind. I'm going to Georgia Tech." I was like, "Georgia Tech? We never even talked about Georgia Tech." Bobby Crimmins was good at getting guys.
Yeah, I know.
Ripple, you had John Sally, you had guys.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I said, okay, I get it, but we never talked about Georgia Tech.
I
So
love.
that's how I ended up finally just saying, Ohio State was the best thing. But I was a Big East guy through and through.
Interesting.
When I was growing up, because think about it, they were on TV, ESPN.
Yeah.
The battles with St. John, Syracuse, Providence at the time, Georgetown. Come on, man. Big time,
Well,
bro.
you get a lot of credit for a Bruce Dalrymple reference. That's
You like that?
pretty. That's pretty good. This is what I love to ask guys like you. So you're a big time college player. So if you
Right.
were entering college basketball today, forget what school you'd go to. Like how much money you think you'd make? Because now everything's over the table. I mean,
A
would you
lot.
be at about a 500 to $1 million a year?
Or more than that.
Crazy.
Because just because of the market. Now, before this House versus the NCAA thing comes down, they're trying to pay these guys right now before June, before this gets enacted when you have a cap of what the university can pay. That's not a cap on NIL. It's just a $20.5 million cap of what you can pay all your sports. But if you got Diabate in AJ in BYU he's going to make 7.
Yeah. Hey, well, think about this, right? Pearl Washington. My
Oh,
sister went to Syracuse. I used to go up there, and when I was in high school, and I'd watch him play. The guy, they was filling the building up because of him. Think about
yep.
how much money he missed out on.
Oh, yeah.
Patrick, Chris Mullin. I'll give you one. And the guy didn't even become an NBA player. What about Damon Bailey? How
Oh,
big he
Damon.
was in
Oh, he would
Indiana?
have been.
How much do you think he could have made in
He would
NIL?
have killed it. Just Indiana alone. Oh, it would
Right?
have been. I mean, he was a legend in the 8th grade,
Exactly.
so he would have been making money through high school.
It's, I mean, those guys like Pearl Washington, who, only made a little bit of money in the NBA, like, how could his family not be a little bit bitter?
I
How much?
know.
Look at Zion recently. How big was Zion?
Yeah, in high school. Yeah,
Those 30 games at Duke. How much money would he have made?
yeah, man. It was a long time coming. It's starting to regulate itself, trying to balance the playing field with these schools. But again, it's a difference with what the university and collective can pay to what still the young men and women can still go out and earn on their own NIL deal.
Yeah.
Even though it's a cap here, you can still go earn another 5, 6, 7, 8 million on endorsement deals.
All right. All right. I asked you about college. Let me ask you about this. Why the media and why not coaching or front office? Is it just like you don't really want it to get it? Hey, listen, being in the media is a grind. People think it's easy and you're good at it. And it's not easy to be good at it because, you got to know what you're talking about.
Right.
So I get that part of it. But why media? Why not
Coaching,
coaching or front office?
because I love my free time.
Yeah.
I'm selfish with my free time. With the media, I'm doing all the stuff during a finite period from
Yeah.
October to, depending on the playoffs, mid-May. But then I have my time to go do and still, be able to live a life with coach. And
Yep.
I thought about it before, Frank. I would love to be a GM because I've been in so many different situations with coaches and players and organizations. I kind of know what works and what doesn't, and be great at putting a team together. But then I thought about the grind,
Yep.
and I said to myself, if I was younger and maybe do it over, maybe think about it. But I said, I love what I do. I get a chance to kind of dictate a schedule. I'm in and out. I haven't lost a game since I retired.
Yep.
I don't have to watch. I watch tape, but not to scrutinize or try to put game plans together. I read a lot, but it's fun. And I stay in touch with the game because this is year 18 for me. So the beauty of what I do too is I've seen a lot of guys, Draymond Green, come in as a freshman, and now he's in year 15, 16 in NBA.
Yeah.
So to be able to have that really good combination of watching young men play in college and then watch what they're able to do either overseas or in the NBA and have a relationship with them and cover them on both ends, it's been the best, man.
Yeah. I covered baseball for 2 years. I covered the Mets, and it's hard work, man. And it's like all summer, and I just want to be off in the summer. And I always want to cover the NBA, and I was lucky enough to get a chance to the Knicks, and I kind of like the schedule because like you don't really want to do it. I get it, summer league in July, but you're off basically
I'm
July,
off.
August, in September, which is a great thing. Remember when the Atlanta Hawks owner, he came out, this was before the bubble, and he was suggesting, why don't we have the NBA season, like the finals
Some,
end around August? I was
yeah.
like, are you out of your mind? I'm like, I'm out. I'm covering college
You're not taking
basketball.
my summer away, bro.
I do not do that. Go,
No.
go to August. You out of your mind? We can't do that. Hell no.
Hey, man, listen, man, I appreciate you coming on. It's been a long time coming. I love to circle back around once we get deeper in the playoffs and kind of really dig into the weeds once we see, who's who, what's what, and where we're heading, man.
Now I'm happy that I got to know you over the last like few months or so. I always been a big fan, both on and off the court. Keep up the good work. And now you got to come on our show, but we won't torment you. We'll make sure you're somewhere in the East Coast. We're not going to wake you up in the morning. Not
Yeah,
doing that.
yeah. I got you, man. I appreciate you, man.
All right, Jimmy.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
All right, you
Take
got it.
care.
Shout out, thanks again, and Frank Isola for joining me. As we wrap this up, another, I think, great week, another great show, another great opportunity. For me, now I'm getting ready for games in the quarterfinal tonight, a little golf tomorrow, semifinals on Saturday, finals on Sunday for the crown. So enjoy it. Have a great rest of the week. Looking forward to another great show next week. Trying to decide who the next guest should be. If you got any ideas, any thoughts, send it through IG, hit me up on Twitter, and let me know your thoughts. But until then, have a great weekend. A lot of great basketball coming up. Final Four, of course, this weekend. Don't know who you got. Still like Duke. Love to see Duke and Florida play, but Houston is something special. Stay tuned. Going to be a lot of fun. Enjoy the weekend.